Now that the Premier of British Columbia has gone out of his way to accommodate the building of a massive LNG production facility in Kitimat, we have to ask, where will the gas come from? The answer, of course, is it comes from under the ground in both BC and Alberta. Natural gas is the byproduct of decayed plant and animal life that was compacted and pressurized under layers of sand and rock over millions of years. Deep under the Earth's crust, in temperatures that exceeded 120 degrees Celsius, the organic matter cooks, and eventually the carbon bonds in the organic material break down and fossil fuels are formed. This is called primary gas. Now, secondary natural gas accompanies oil, which cooked for many millions of years more. Getting that gas out of the ground means drilling, and it also means hydraulic fractured drilling, also known as fracking. Well, what exactly is fracking? How is the operation carried out? And more importantly, is it a process we want to be a byproduct of the LNG industry that we've invited to set up shop here in British Columbia? We invited Brad Hayes, the director of the Canadian Society of Unconventional Resources. He's an adjunct professor at the University of Alberta and a respected expert on fracking, to join us for a conversation that matters about fracking, what it is, how it's done, and most importantly, is it safe?
Conversations That Matter is a partner program for the Centre for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
Welcome to Conversations.
Good afternoon. Pleased to be here.
Unconventional resources. What exactly are unconventional resources?
Well, they're unconventional. We're talking about oil and gas. The reason they're unconventional is because you have to do unconventional things to get them out of the ground.
Such as?
Such as drilling horizontal wells and doing hydraulic fracturing at a very large scale. Most of the history of the oil and gas industry, we've drilled vertical wells, we might have fractured them, but it's been a pretty well-established process.
Up and down, that's it.
Up and down and vertical.
Yeah.
The last 10 years, what we've had to do in order to access these unconventional resources is to drill our wells vertically and then turn them horizontally, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 meters under the earth, and drill them out into the formation containing the oil and gas.
So what exactly is fracturing? Like, we hear about it all the time. It's called fracking and fracturing, and you know.
Yeah.
But what exactly is it?
It's a process where you actually break the rock, the reservoir rock that's underground, that 2,000 or 3,000 meters deep, and you break it by pumping a fluid down, usually a water-based fluid, and just putting it down the hole under so much pressure that the rock is physically shattered and breaks apart along that horizontal wellbore 2,000 meters deep.
So what happens then? So I put all that pressure and water in there, it fractures the ground there, and releases, well, when there's oil there, I guess it releases oil.
Yep.
How does it get back out if there's all that pressure pushing in? Are you extracting the water back out after you've okay?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you go that deep in the ground, there's a lot of pressure already. I mean, all the pressure of the rock over top, 2,000 meters of rock pushing down on that reservoir. So if I inject that water under very high pressure, I break the rock, and then I just quit injecting, the actual pressure of the rock over top, the reservoir, will push my water right back out. It'll flow the water back out of the hole, and once it's flowed all that water, that frac fluid, out of the hole, then whatever else is in the reservoir, the oil or the gas, is going to come out behind it, which is exactly the same process as when we drill a conventional well. You drill down there, you open up the reservoir to the wellbore, and there's so much pressure that the fluids just come up and out of the wellbore.
So how long does that flow continue out of that bore that you've put down? You've gone horizontally, and you've created this, so you've now got a channel.
Yep.
What happens? Like, for how long is that there going to be a flow from there?
As long as there's enough fluid, oil or gas, down there under pressure to come out and be produced from the wellbore. So it depends. If you've drilled a really long wellbore and you've accessed a big area of reservoir, you could be flowing the oil and gas back for 10 years, 20 years, because you've actually stimulated that flow over a very big area, and it comes up the little pipe. I mean, you know, the pipe's about that big that it comes up, and so it takes a long time to get all that out of there if you've done the job well.
It's got to get you to hang on for a second while we take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Sorry for the interruption, but I need your help. I'm asking you to support the show by becoming a patron. That means pledging $1 per show. Conversations is a unique program. There's no grandstanding, no arguing, no yelling. Instead, I sit down with people who have unique insights, specialized knowledge, and experiences that inform and enlighten. And we do this on an incredibly limited budget with a very small crew. Well, this is my office, and it's where I edit the show. And then once it's ready, we give it away. You know, so many different websites around the world are carrying the show, but they get it for free. They don't pay us. So I'm asking you to pledge $1 per show by going to patreon.com/conversations that matter. Thanks. We want to keep producing conversations, and with your help, we can. Now let's get back to the show. Once you've done it, out comes the machinery. And the water, what happens to the water when it comes out of the well?
So the water that we put down there, we get some of it back. Some of it just gets absorbed into the formation. But let's say we get 30% or 50% of the water back. So it comes out the wellbore. We have to recapture it because it's been down there. It's been contaminated. We've put some chemicals in it to give it the properties we need it to have. So all of the water has to be captured. It's basically taken back to tanks. And in most Canadian operations now, where we're doing a number of these wells, we recycle that water. At the end of the day, when we finally end up with this remnant of water that's been up and down a whole bunch of times and is, you know, quite saline and perhaps not very usable anymore, then we'll have to dispose of it, and that'll be down a deep disposal well. We'll dispose of it, you know, again, 1,000, 2,000 meters underground into a formation that's way below anything that, you know, we would get drinking water out of, and that's already full of highly saline or toxic water already.
It's a pretty big operation, isn't it?
Huge operations, yeah. They're very, and that's part of, I think it's part of the issue that people have with unconventional development sometimes. I tell people about it and say, you know, it's a very intensive operation. It happens over big areas. And even though it's very efficient in terms of doing a lot of things from one point on the surface, it's a big time industrial process that goes on for a period of time while we're drilling and then when we're fracking. Once we're done the fracking and everything's flowing out and we've got our oil and gas coming out, then we can move all the equipment off and put, basically put kind of a wellhead cover on, valves and so on that guide the flow into the pipeline, and we're pretty much done.
When you go down, you can go and turn in one direction. From the same hole, do you turn and go in another direction and another direction and so on? Because
just about. It's not exactly the same vertical hole. So what you'll do in the bigger operations, I'll call them super pads, you might have 4 drilling rigs going at once in the same area. And each one of them will drill its only vertical hole. It'll take it off in some direction. Then if the next well they want to drill, many of these rigs now, the modern ones are equipped, they can just basically shuffle them over a few meters and start a new vertical hole. Okay. So they don't go in all directions from one vertical hole. Each horizontal well has a vertical and then a horizontal. Okay. But they're all very closely spaced together at the surface.
And at different depths as well?
It depends on the reservoir that you're looking at. Most companies try to do a very systematic development at one particular level because they optimize the techniques they use in terms of how long they drill the wells and how they formulate their frac fluid and all this. If they want to go to the same spot and drill a horizontal well into a different formation or a different elevation underground, they probably need to change the procedure details a little bit, so they'll probably come back and maybe do a round of horizontal drilling at that different level at a different time. Just again for the purposes of efficiency.
So you're getting a pretty good yield from this.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of protest about this. And they talk about water contamination. Is that a legitimate concern?
Any industrial process that you undertake like that has risks, and accidents do happen. But to be very fair about hydraulic fracturing, many of the mechanisms or the ways that people imagine that water can be contaminated, it doesn't really add up. You know, when we drill the well, it's lined with steel casing and with cement that prevents the fluids that are in the hole, whether it's the salt water or whether it's the oil and gas later, from leaking and getting in contact with drinking water that's in a underground, you know, for water wells, or is at the surface.
So is the placement of that sleeve, does it happen simultaneous with the drilling?
It does, that's right. So that sleeve or that casing is all in place well before you ever do the fracking operation.
Okay, so you're sealing that off.
It's all sealed off before the fracking happens.
So even if you do happen to pass through an underground water aquifer that may have drinking water.
Yeah.
Not all do, but
some do. They're always very shallow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That you're going to protect any flow that's coming up from contaminating that water.
That's right.
Okay.
So, and the regulator in British Columbia, it's the BC Oil and Gas Commission, has its number of regulations that tell you exactly how you have to, you know, what depths, what measurements you've got to make, how you've got to put that sleeve into place, procedures to make sure that it's done correctly. Now, it's an operation, people are doing it. There can be mistakes made. And sometimes wellbore construction doesn't happen exactly properly. But it's like anything else. I mean, there's very odd exceptions, but almost every single well, you know, the rules are in place, the wells are done properly. It's a highly efficient and highly effective way of protecting groundwater. There's really more risk of contaminating groundwater or contaminating water that we're worried about at the surface, a lake or something, by a truck driving along the highway and accidentally spilling its load, for example, into a lake or something like that. The risk of something like that happening, well, it's quite small because trucks are built well too, but I mean, it's a greater risk than contamination from a wellbore.
The fact that you say, though, that accidents can happen, we live in a soundbite world where somebody's going to go, you see, he admits accidents can happen. Does that make it very difficult to operate in that kind of an environment where people are like willing to jump on that kind of statement?
You know, I think we have to be very honest about these things. I mean, I can say very honestly, the regulations are very good. There are very few, if any, accidents. I'm not aware, and I certainly looked at a lot of the literature, of there being any incidences in Canada of a wellbore failure so that oil or gas or deep saline water have contaminated drinking water.
You're not aware of any incidences?
I'm not, no. Not in Canada.
Okay.
Now
we hear reports out of the United States that it's happening.
We do, and what's interesting, if you look at a lot of the, I guess I would call it advocacy pieces about, where people are trying to make the case that these are dangerous procedures, you'll see that a lot of the examples that they use are from the United States, and they're from back when the industry started these procedures 10 or more years ago. Basically back when it wasn't very well regulated in some jurisdictions, and before we really understood all the risks. There is a very different regulatory mindset and climate between Canada and the United States in general in the industry. We tend to be much more cautious here about putting much firmer regulations in place, and so you'll see that most of the examples, people like to talk about the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania and some things happening in Colorado and things like that. They don't really come and talk to us about things that are happening in the Duvernay, in the Horn River Basin, or in the Montney Fairway, because quite frankly, they don't have any examples to point at where there's been, bad procedures followed, where there's been contamination.
We have heard of some seismic activity associated with fracking in northeastern British Columbia. What is the risk there?
Every hydraulic fracturing operation that you do puts energy into the ground. And one of the ways we actually monitor and control our hydraulic fracturing is to put out what we call microseismic array, or we put out a bunch of geophones, listening devices. And while we do the fractures, the listening devices pick up all those little tiny events of the rock breaking deep underground. We can map out how things happen. what we know from looking at these microseismic data is that sometimes if you drill your horizontal well and you inject your fluids and you get close to a fault or a break that's already in existence underground, so that fluid, some of the energy can actually go into that fault that's there already. Now, a lot of the faults in Western Canada they're naturally stressed. Now, if you go off of the West Coast, and you've got the plate boundaries and that where the big earthquakes happen, well, there's a lot of stress on those faults because there's activity already going on even now. If you're talking about northeastern BC, well, the stress that's on those rocks is the stress that happened 60 million years ago when the mountains formed.
Right.
There's still stress there. So if you put fluid in there, if you lubricate that fault and it's got some stress on it, it may move. And that's what's happened. So as we monitor our frac jobs, what we'll see is there'll be some energy releases, some faults will move, there'll be little seismic events. The vast majority of them are too small to detect, but some of the bigger ones are bigger, and there have been a few up to magnitude 4.6, 4.8 that if you're really nearby, you can feel that. And there's even the potential, you could feel it quite significantly if you were sitting right on top of that event. Now, most of these wells aren't drilled right underneath people. They're pretty remote in northeastern BC. And even though you feel it, you're talking about feeling things like a big truck going by or something like that. You're not talking about a movie earthquake. So I think what people worry about is, well, if we can get a 4, well, maybe we can get a 5, or maybe we can get a 6.
Or we're going to trigger something.
Or we're going to trigger something bigger.
It was ready to go, and we've now provoked it into action.
I think people have that concern, and you know what? That seems to me quite a logical concern.
Yeah.
Now, if you at CSIR, we work with a number of academics on these seismicity issues. There are researchers at the University of Calgary, Western University, places like that, and they're very careful of being academics. They don't want to say anything with certainty. Anything in the academic world is possible. But quite frankly, if you look at the stresses that exist in northeastern BC or in western Alberta, where we've seen a couple of these seismic events too, I mean, we're not talking about being at the edge of the plate out in the Pacific Ocean in the Ring of Fire. We're talking about in the interior of the continent, and quite frankly, the stresses that exist there that could be released, that could be provoked by our putting fluid into the ground. There's really, it's very unlikely.
Yeah.
And again, I'm being an academic here now too. It's very unlikely that you're going to release anything of much bigger magnitude than we've seen already.
Let's talk about your credentials, and who CSIR is, because there's going to be somebody who's watching going, oh yeah, who's paying for that guy? So who is paying for you?
CSIR is paying for me. So CSIR is the Canadian Society for Unconventional Resources. Our members include all different organizations from, there's industry companies, there's regulators. So for example, the Oil and Gas Commission is a member, the Alberta Energy Regulator is a member, the provincial government geological agencies are members, the universities are members, because much of our really good technical material that gets presented at our luncheons and at our conventions and so on comes from university research, the academics. Again, we're mostly this organization of engineers, geoscientists, business people, and that really want to understand the science and how to make unconventional oil and gas extraction better. And CSIR is paying for me to come do this because basically they want to get out in front of more people that this good scientific work's being done, that we've got some really very good understanding of the processes, of the regulations, of all the things that go on to do with hydraulic fracturing and water resources and really just want that information out there.
So who's your most important audience? It sounds to me like you want to be talking to people who are regulators and who are in the industry and sharing information that says here are best practices. Are you also active in working with students who are moving into the profession?
Mm-hmm. So you're absolutely right. I mean, most of our effort is focused at exchange of information amongst our membership between our industry people, our regulators, the academics, and so on. We host all sorts of events and workshops where we get together and show what research is being done and so on. And it's a very good symbiotic relationship. There's a lot of support from industry and from regulators for academics to do new work and things like that. The work that I'm engaged in right now is we call our outreach program. And so yes, we've modeled after some other outreach programs. Our first audiences have been in the universities, at the technical colleges, talking to students. The people that we know, quite, frankly, are geoscientists and engineers. I know geoscience professors. I'm an adjunct geoscience professor at University of Alberta myself. So we've got good contacts. We go talk to those people because we know those people are going to be in industry. Yeah. And they're going to be our colleagues at some point, or our bosses or whatever someday. But we think it's important now too to get out to a more broad audience.
Why is it important? Why do you feel that the general public needs to be more aware of topics like this?
Yeah. Simply because I think that the general public hears a lot of different things that aren't factually based. They get told many things, and you mentioned before about the potential contamination of groundwater, and there are people out there that will simply say, oh yes, groundwater gets contaminated, oh yes, we're at high risk of damage from earthquakes. Well, oh no, we're not. I mean, those aren't scientifically backed truths. So we would like to contribute to the discussion, the science, right from where it's being done. I mean, the science, the investigations into how injecting water into the earth affects seismicity or earthquakes. I mean, the science experiments are the wells that are being drilled. We're right on the edge of it. So, and we're making the measurements. When I say we, I mean all of the different members of CSIR, the operating companies, the regulators, the academics, and so on. So we feel it's an important thing to contribute more measured sort of scientific facts. And as I've tried to do during the conversation here today, is to realize that it's not perfect. I mean, I would never sit here, and I don't think any responsible person should sit here and say there will never be groundwater contamination, there will never be any problem with seismicity. We understand the processes, we regulate them. Industry tries its best to follow those regulations. Will there be accidents? Will there be things happen that we don't want to happen? Yes, and I can certainly point to there's been some incidences of things that have happened that, while they haven't really damaged the public, they've certainly caused a lot of financial damage to industry companies because they haven't done things well. But what always happens when we get involved as a CSIR with things like that is, well, we help people exchange information. We figure out what went wrong. How do you change the regulations, or how do you change the best practices so that particular event might not happen again?
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to explain a number of things that I kept going, okay, well, how exactly does this work? And like, I am guilty. I read the headlines and I go, yeah, it looks like it's got an awful lot of problems. So thank you ever so much for coming in and sharing this information.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.